I'm Alan Cogan. Join me as I highlight small businesses with interviews on site at distilleries, breweries, and more. My mission is to share the stories of the awesome people behind the craft. Welcome to Crafted Conversations. Well, Wylie, we're here in West Virginia at Devil's Due. Forgive me, I forget the town. Is it Kearneysville?
Kearneysville, West Virginia.
Kearneysville, West Virginia. I have never been here before. I reached out to you and I thought, hey, I want to come talk to you and learn about your distillery. So tell me about yourself and the space that we're in.
Sure. Well, to start with, Kearneysville, West Virginia, not a well-known place. It's a small town. I tell a lot of people who are familiar with Harpers Ferry.
Oh, yeah.
A big national park around here, and most everybody has heard of it at some point or not. In fact, a lot of the people are coming to visit Harpers Ferry here. That's a big reason we put the distillery near here.
Yeah.
Is 3 national parks within 20 minutes. To back up, my name's Wylie McDade, owner of Devil's Due Distillery out here in the Eastern Panhandle, West Virginia. The place where the Shenandoah and the Potomac come to meet together at that little town called Harpers Ferry. My brother-in-law, Brian Halbert, and I own Devil's Due Distillery, and we're just celebrating our 3-year anniversary.
That's awesome. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I told you on the phone before I came here that I live currently in Northern Virginia, so you're not that far from me. And it's kind of funny. My wife and I moved here. We haven't really had the time, or really, we haven't given it the honest effort to come out anywhere, further than the DMV. Just haven't had time. COVID was a big thing when we first moved here.
We opened during COVID.
Yeah, well, I want to hear about that.
That was wild.
That's a small business faux pas, but that's awesome. No, but I've been to Harpers Ferry, small little, cool town, window shopping, etc. But I came across you on social media, and I thought, hey, that's pretty close to me. So thank you for having me here. This is a cool little part of town.
Yeah, absolutely. We, Washington, D.C. is about, well, as they say in West Virginia, as the crow flies, about 45 miles from here.
Yep.
But I mean, if you're now in the mall, it'll take you about, without traffic, about an hour to get out here. So that's a tremendous amount of people in the D.C. area. We see a lot of them out here. Baltimore, maybe about an hour and 20 minutes.
Sure.
But yeah, people realize, hey, look, it's just a short day trip. And a lot of people, even though we're in the Eastern Panhandle, it's a great place to, go get some country road because there's plenty of them out here. That's always been a lot of the lore of, well, John Denver said it best, right?
I was going to say, you're quoting a song I might know.
Yeah, it's, we love John Denver in West Virginia, let me tell you. Put the place on the map.
No, literally.
Literally.
What got you into distilling? That's such a unique, because I would love to do it, but it sounds like a massive lift, especially as a business person.
It is.
You know what I mean?
Well, you're in the Army now, right?
National Guard.
24 and a half years in the Navy. The great thing about being in the military is I retired when I was 44.
Sure.
That leaves a pretty good chunk on the back end. We built in 2015, my brother-in-law and I, we built a prototype still. You'd snap a shot of it in the front room. A little 5-gallon job up there. Just to see if we could do it.
Sure.
But really, there's a little bit of science that goes into this job. And it doesn't matter if you do it on a large scale or you do it on a small scale. You still have to learn that science. So, and the best way to do it's hands-on. There's no school of distillation in the country. There's no college campus that I know of that has a license to distill alcohol. I think some of the allure of bourbon and whiskey and alcohol is that just the fact that it's illegal.
Yeah, right.
And so you have to go to a distillery if you want to see how it's going. But yeah, so we worked at it for a good couple of years. Side note there, West Virginia legalized moonshining this year. you can make fantastic whiskey at home on a 5-gallon still. You don't need a big operation. You just need to get the steps right.
Right.
You need to find good quality ingredients, and so we went and we sourced those. Even when we were, prototyping all this out on a very tiny scale, understood the different kinds of grains that go into whiskey, typically corn, rye, wheat, malt, some combination thereof of those. And then we had to even understand, how finely does the grain need to be ground? Honestly, I figured out if I could turn it into powder, that would be the best way to distill, because when you grind that grain, you're unlocking starch.
Right.
And then, starch is worthless to a distiller. Starch is what bread flour is made of, and when you add water and yeast, makes your bread rise, makes it taste good.
Right.
Doesn't make any alcohol.
No.
So we have to convert those starches into sugars. Scientifically, that's called saccharification, where you're taking something and turning it into sugar like that. And we use the enzymes that naturally occur in malt to do that conversion. So when we grind up a lot of corn and we mash it in, effectively we make corn syrup. Now, corn syrup is a fermentable sugar, right? Corn sugars are fermentable. When you add yeast to those, they start pumping out the hooch. Now, you can't use sugar because we'd be making rum. And we're not. We're making whiskey, and whiskey's made from grain. And so the whiskey distiller has that extra step they've got to take where there's chemistry involved. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of chemistry involved in rum as well. Then we had to but then from there, so we had to figure out how to mash these grains, how to effectively convert the sugars into the grains, and then how to ferment them. And so then there was a lot of research into yeast and the types of yeast that are used. Bread yeast will work, but once your alcohol content in your mash gets up to about 6 to 8%, it'll kill your yeast.
Right.
Brewer's yeast will work. But once your alcohol content gets up above 12 to 15%, it's going to start affecting your yeast. And honestly, if you went to my yeast maker, there are thousands of yeasts to use. But distillers have a relatively small range. Distillers' yeasts are bred to be able to live in alcohol contents in excess of maybe 24%.
Okay.
And so they're very hardy. And in the American bourbon industry, your standard yeast, for all you would-be distillers out there, is dried active distiller's yeast. We call it Daddy. And dried active distiller's yeast, a very hardy yeast used in the production of many of the different spirits out there. And then now, by spirit, you can get into very Gucci yeast. Like for our rums that we make, we use a very specific yeast design to make rums, designed to generate some of those deeper and more interesting flavors. And so it took us about 5 years, 3, 4, 5 years of practicing on very small batch and figured out that we could make some pretty good whiskey,
Sure.
even on a small still. So the next step naturally would be to size that equipment up. So my brother, who worked in contracting for many, many years, he retired from his job. I retired from mine. We bought a 150-gallon still, which I consider one of the smallest commercially viable stills you can buy on the market. And we became a micro distillery. We're pretty close we're a nano distillery. But the idea is to use what we have now to make the best whiskey that we can for rapid growth. And that's what we're really looking for, to leapfrog into the next level and hopefully become a small distillery.
Sure.
Now, a small distillery, that can make enough whiskey to feed a few states. So that's one step in the progression of now going not only from a model of a tasting room into the distribution. And so it's incremental. Distilleries aren't made overnight. There are a couple flash in the pans that you've heard of that are now raging, big popular distilleries. Yeah, that does occur. But if you look at the big guys, these are generational issues that they struggle with. Long-term issues. Nothing in distilling happens quickly.
No.
Nothing.
Well, I was going to say the inverse too, of the flash in the pans that existed for maybe a year and unfortunately never were able to get off the ground.
That is always one of our biggest fears.
Yeah.
My news feed, a big portion of it is distilleries. And yeah, from time to time I see those statements were closed. One of the ones I saw recently was due to an inability to find sufficient distribution for their products. And so the business is risky. The craft brewery explosion, although it's got us by probably 15, 20 years, it's, and I don't even believe it's matured yet. A tremendous amount of those coming out. And now the distilleries are coming online. But I don't think you'll see it to the same extent as the craft breweries, mostly because the cost of entry into the business is very, very steep.
Right.
That's not just dollars.
No.
Right. For your viewers, it will take you twice as long and cost 4 times as much as your initial estimates to open a distillery. But it's in regulation. Once you start looking at the paperwork drills that the federal government, the state government will put you in, it becomes a barrier to entry.
Right.
And so you see them popping up a lot slower. But I think that's going to change in the future. Like, I really do.
I think that's right. And I think there have been a lot of organizations, some of them are a little bit too big for their britches, but there's a lot out there that are trying to help navigate, be the beacon of light for these small craft operations.
Oh, yeah.
And the beer side, too. That it's tough as a small business owner. I mean, at the end of the day, you are a business. Yeah, it's awesome you're making whiskey. It's something we enjoy drinking, all those the cool tradition history. But at the end of the day, you are a small business.
Yeah.
It has to pay the bills. And some people forget that. We come here for cool tours and having samples. It's like you still have to pay the overhead.
When you go to a craft whiskey distillery, oftentimes you will find that the products are more expensive.
Yep.
This is always a volume issue. Small volume places pay small volume prices for all of the components. And when you consider is a Sailor, our distillery dog, when you consider that you have to put the entire project together from soup to nuts, that they'd say in the Navy, you have to bring in the raw materials, then you have to do all of the work to produce the whiskey, then you have to age the whiskey and hold that material online. Then you have to bottle and package the whiskey.
Yeah.
If you can't buy in massive volumes, then you pay closer to retail for all of those products on the way in. So forgive the small guys, but that's just the cost of doing business typically.
Right.
And if you ever want to grow, every penny has to get poured back into the business for a long period of time.
Yeah.
So don't think any of us owners are, you won't find a Ferrari in my driveway anytime soon. I'll put it that way. It's just it's just how it is building a business, but it's same as any small business.
Oh yeah. One of the myth busts or the busting, how do I want to say that? The things I love debunking with distillers like yourself is that the idea sometimes is that you guys are just out here drinking, having a good time. And man, if you sampled every product by the ounce, you wouldn't make it to the next morning.
No, you wouldn't.
That's not how you're doing business.
If a guy owning a distillery could develop terrible problems. I mean, if you look around, we're surrounded. We could swim in whiskey in here if we wanted to. No, I tell a lot of people that our whiskey consumption is small. Typically, when we do barrel, we got it. There are certain times we'll open a barrel and we'll taste the barrel, and that's because, we had talked before we started. This whiskey is a story, right? And in order to tell that story, I've got to understand what the flavors are that we're developing and what's coming out, so that we can explain to the customer, this type of whiskey is going to have these types of flavors. This is the provenance of the grain, how long it was in the barrel, and how that's going to affect, the flavor of that whiskey. And so you have to taste them. In fact, you have to taste them all. Normally what we'll do is, if we're going to do sampling, we do it in the morning.
Sure.
We don't have our coffee first because you want your palate to be very fresh. And then we'll sit back here in the barrel room. We'll draw a few samples, typically about a 1/4 ounce, and maybe we'll do 2 or 3 whiskeys that we think are coming up, and then we'll sit around the table. Everyone will smell the aromas. Everyone will sample them at barrel strength, Might add a little bit of water to it. I prefer than everyone to enjoy it normally as they would. Might add a little bit of ice, let it calm down a little bit, proof down. I prefer to drink my whiskey probably in the 60 to 70 proof range. Let the ice or the water bring it down a little bit so it really opens up the bouquet. And then you can pick out some of those smaller notes. We go around the table. We do aromas first. All right, what do you smell? And I'll record those, typically on the back of one of our little tasting cards here. And then we'll give the flavor profile. What are you tasting on the tip of your tongue, across your palate, as you swallow it, about the exhale. You have smell sensors in your mouth and taste sensors in your nose as well.
Sure.
And so all of those things we try and take into account as we kind of begin to understand what it means to taste whiskey.
Sure.
And then it's just practice.
Yeah.
And over time, we'll have little charts and tasting wheels. And over time, you can start to pick out some of those individual notes in there. And then that's how we develop a sale, and then we'll bring people back in when we sample these. Well, this is what we taste. But you'd be really surprised to see the light bulb go off in people's eyes. Oh yeah, I get it. I taste that too. There's a fine art to tasting whiskey, and I tell a lot of people if it's worth paying money for and it's worth drinking, well then you should really ponder it, enjoy the flavor, and try and pick out some of those notes. Because that's kind of what whiskey's all about.
Right. When did you become a whiskey drinker? Was that always is whiskey your goal? That was your baby, or how did you come upon that?
I told I've always enjoyed Scotch.
Sure.
I've always enjoyed bourbon. I would come home on leave a lot when I was in the military. I'd always go, see Brian, my brother-in-law and business partner. And it seemed like every time I was home on leave, we'd, near the end, we were talking about, what we wanted to do. We thought we wanted to do something together afterwards. And we were always having a glass of whiskey. We were having real conversations about it. And finally, one of us just looked in our hands and said, well, why don't we try and make this? 6 months later, I ordered a 4x8 sheet of copper in the mail. Found the patterns online. By the way, there's some great examples out there. Lay the patterns, cut it out. Took me about a month and a half. We built a still we could fire on a turkey fryer. Designed a thumper for it to bring the proof up. And then the rest was kind of history after that.
Wow. I mean,
it's been, it's fun. We wanted to do something that we wanted to enjoy, something we could do. We'd like to work with our hands.
Sure.
When Brian was young, he was a carpenter for a number of years as he was getting his degree and working on, his professional life. And I always like to be a hands-on person. And so this was kind of a great natural step of something we could make it.
Yeah. From
scratch.
Yeah.
And then label it and sell it ourselves.
Did you, when you got into it, did you have a goal in mind of we want to make this thing? Was there an example out there in the market that said, this is our profile, this is what we like? Was it always bourbon?
If you want to start a distillery, I recommend starting with an anchor. We decided to start with something with a big B on the bottle, right? That B is very important, bourbon, right? But bourbon, rum, vodka, maybe agave spirit or tequila if you make it in Mexico, but agave spirit in the United States or single malt. These are the big type of words you're going to see out there in the store. Those should be your one. At least one of those should be your core competency.
Right.
You should learn how to make it very well because there's going to be a market for it. Now we also sell moonshine. Now moonshine would be very, very wildly popular, especially because we're making it in West Virginia and there's a lot of history and roots here.
Sure.
But as for a well-known global spirit, not as much. And so there are spirits you could focus on out there. But if the public if you have to introduce it to the public for the first time, well, you're gonna have a lot bigger challenges. You know what I mean? So we chose the whiskeys, and to understand those because there is they're still a growing market in the United States.
Right.
And then we chose whiskey because, bourbon has such a long history.
Sailor wants some limelight.
Oh, mister. You hop down there.
Hi,
Come
bud.
on, you. It has a longevity and go on now, boy. And when times are tough, people will, they'll drown their sorrows in a glass of whiskey. And when times are good, people will celebrate with a glass of whiskey.
I've been there both ways.
So when you look at markets, when they go up and down, bourbon is always maintained as one of those strong kind of core commodities that's always growing and always on sale. I mean, look at COVID.
Oh.
They cleared the liquor store shelves, right? Like, in my opinion, what happened when COVID hit, and we opened during the middle of that, it was crazy. But people, instead of going to the bar and buying it by the shot, because that option was no longer available, they went and they bought it by the bottle.
Right.
In fact, and it wasn't really the consumption, because I think there's now a tremendous amount of whiskey on people's shelves. It was just that they wanted to have it to be able to have something to, at the end of the day to have a drink. And the shelves just became cleared.
Yep.
I don't know. I believe there's a whiskey glut coming in the future because the market saw this big signal, and there's a lot of expansion in the whiskey business. So there is a tremendous amount of whiskey coming out of the markets, and we'll see how that does in the future. I mean, it was so bad. There were some big labels that were coming in plastic bottles for a while.
Oh yeah.
And like, holy cow! But like the glass factories were completely wiped out. In fact, the recovery is still occurring because all of those industries that we draw from, they were closed down. Liquor stores and distilleries were not closed. In fact, liquor stores and distilleries were booming during COVID.
Right.
The distilleries made the hand sanitizer. I mean, they go little distilleries. I know a lot of guys who they were pumping out tremendous amount of alcohol for hand sanitizer and getting government contracts for it, which was just wild. Yeah. I know a couple of guys that are stuck with a whole bunch of hands. By the time, those big hand sanitizer companies got it online, once they started releasing always buy hand sanitizer from your local distiller because he's got a whole lot left on his, might have a whole lot left in the back room.
Just don't get pulled over. You smell like whiskey.
Yeah, it all smelled like whiskey, right? Purell does not smell like whiskey,
No.
And the hand sanitizer we're getting, that's corn whiskey I smell. That's wild.
It always baffles me, the market, because it's only in the last, I want to say 10 to 15 years that bourbon has really just blown apart the market. And Buffalo Trace has been the notorious BIG, right? Everyone knows Buffalo Trace because their marketing is massive. And that's not a problem, but I'm kind of curious to see where it goes. Bourbon's always been big, of course. It's always been king. But craft distilling has blown up, allowing everyone to make bourbon. And then rye's kind of starting to catch up a little bit. And
a little bit, yeah.
Agave spirit is kind of waiting for its limelight. I'm not sure where that's going to go because marketing is kind of tough with that. It's just tequila and
they have to market the term agave spirit for a lot longer.
Yeah.
Because the average consumer, they'll look at that and they won't know what it is.
Well, and
that's always problematic.
You have tequila, a bottle next to agave spirit bottle. They're virtually the same chemically, but everyone's gonna go for tequila. They know what that is.
Yeah.
I get it. And the other big one is American Single Malt, and that's the laws are changing for that too.
Well, the Scots get the right to Scotch, and if Mexico gets the right to tequila, America gets the right to bourbon. That's you just can't make them in the other place, so we have to give them different names. So, yeah, you should definitely be looking out for fine American single malts and fine agave spirits because they are being produced in the United States, and there's some really fantastic ones out there.
Oh yeah,
and that name just needs to catch on. I always thought single malt was a lot easier because single malt Scotch is typical,
right?
So you know kind of where you're going with that.
There's some infighting in there's the American Single Malt Commission. I know a couple of people who are on the board, but there was originally some infighting before they actually wrote the policy because single malt, you think of Scotch, which is barley, malted barley. But there are a lot of American producers that say, well, what if I want to do 100% malted rye or malted oats? And they said, well, no, everyone thinks a single malt is barley. It is 100% barley. If you want to say it's 100% rye malt, you can say that. So it's a little bit of an infighting on what the definition of single malt meant.
Well, we released a single malt rye last year. Man, that stuff was really good, and at least they didn't come after us. You know, I've heard a few horror stories about Irish whiskey. So Ireland, Irish whiskey, you know, and if you want to release an Irish style whiskey in the United States, you've got to be very careful with your labeling. I've heard a couple companies getting tussles with the country of Ireland over this, and so yeah, so I mean, a great care has to be taken in labeling. Don't worry, you have the federal government for that. The TTB.
Oh yeah, they'll help you.
If you want
out.
to be a distiller, you'll become very familiar with them, and they are going to look at each of your labels and they approve them. So, you know, you have to submit, and then you'll have to get an approval back, and they're very, very specific about wording.
Yes,
wording matters in this industry.
Yeah.
What you can put on that bottle, how it's formulated. And exactly what you're stating on the front of that bottle. You got to be very, very careful with it.
In that same vein, I'm curious because West Virginia is kind of a weird state among all the others. I mean, I'm saying this from coming from Wisconsin, where I can buy Everclear at my local CVS. I moved to Virginia and ABC stores. Moving to North Carolina, ABC stores. I get it, government controlled. But West Virginia technically hasn't repealed the Prohibition era laws.
They have not. Well, you know, it's funny. They legalized moonshining in West Virginia this year, and they had to change a law from 1936. Like, moonshine has been banned for nearly 100 years. I find it so exciting, although technically federally illegal still.
Right.
That something that's been banned for 100 years is now legal, and I think there's really great things for, you know, West Virginia. There's 25 distilleries in West Virginia. Given the number of distilleries in the United States, we should have closer to about 160, and so there's a tremendous amount of room for growth here. And now that, well, you know what I tell a lot of West Virginians, I say, you can pull your still off the back porch and put it on the front porch now, because good. Everybody's doing it. Yeah. But now that, you know, they're kind of taking it out of the moonlight and into the sunlight, if you will, people are going to start experimenting. And that's how we got, well, look, in 1982, if you went down to your local steakhouse and asked for an IPA, they'd look at you like you had three eyes, right? There were a very small amount of beers until they allowed the home brewing of alcohol, which is, I don't know, I think it's only 30 or 40 years old, that rule, right?
Right.
And in that time, you know, all the garage guys figured out how to make really good beer, and that's where the brewing industry came from. So I think there's a huge explosion in distilling coming. I think West Virginia in the future is going to be a powerhouse in it, because they're letting people do that experimentation now at home, which is going to give them just another step up to be able to do it legally, you know, with license, or do it with license and commercially. And so I think over the next 10 years, it's going to be pretty wild to watch West Virginia grow. Has
West Virginia, maybe it might be by county, but have they been helpful in the allowance of a small business like yourself to build and grow and say, hey, we're making whiskey?
10 years ago, it would have been a lot harder to open a distillery here. In the last 10 years, the West Virginia legislature has really tried to at least do some reform on their alcohol policy. And that is the reason that now there are even the distilleries that are here. And so, yes, they are very, very helpful. They're trying their best. I think at some point we're going to have to stop one-lining rules, and maybe there needs to be comprehensive reform in ABC policy in the state. And I think people are starting to realize that. You know, I mean, some of these, there are rules on the books that are over, 100 years old.
Yeah. And
they just need to be, brought out, and maybe we take a look at the more holistic approach one of these days. That hasn't occurred yet, but what has made it commercially viable. I'll put it that way, to actually be able to do it here. And we couldn't be more excited about it. The agriculture is still largely intact throughout the state. That is, I mean, look, another tip: you want to start a distillery, start it where farmland is readily accessible to you.
Right.
Because unless you're going to start a farm distillery, you're going to have to buy this grain. We deal primarily with small farmers. My corn comes from a local dairy. And my heirloom corns, they're now being contract grown in small areas.
Sure.
You find a farmer and you tell them, hey, look, I want you to contract grow a few acres for me. The overwhelming response has been incredibly positive. Oh yeah, I would love to. You tell me it's going to go to my local distiller and they make bourbon out of corn I grow yeah, I'll set aside 5, 6, 7 acres for you. We'll do a special project. And as we grow, hopefully that just the more, and we can.
Hey y'all, Alan Cogan here with Crafted Conversations. If you want to support the show and the mission of sharing the stories of craft, head over to buymeacoffee.com/craftedconvos. I'd really appreciate throwing a couple bucks my way to help me pay for travel, the equipment that I use, the time that I spend editing, all the software that I use. I really appreciate any support you can give me. And if you can't afford a couple bucks, at least give me some feedback or go over to our YouTube and subscribe or follow us on Spotify. Anything helps to make sure that we share the story of craft and give these small business owners a little limelight and get them out on a platform that really showcases what they're doing. I can't do this without you guys or your support, so I would really appreciate you pitching in and helping out. So I'll see you out there, and I really appreciate it. Cheers.
What's up, Squirt?
Hi, bud. No whiskey for you.
Yeah, no whiskey for you today.
That's one thing I love, though, about craft distillers, especially smaller operations, because you do have that sense of community working with your local farmers, and I'm sure they enjoy a free bottle here and there.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? But do you take a lot of pride in that? I mean, it sounds like you're enthusiastic about helping the local guy.
I mean, our whole mission there is, look at you. You are going to you're going to make really good TV.
Yeah.
But kind of our whole mission in the beginning was to try and source as much of the grain as possible locally.
Right.
But it lends to the story. But I think it does something more than that. It really affects the flavor of your whiskey. Corn grown here in the soils here is going to have a slightly different flavor than grown even some miles from here.
Oh, sure.
And the area here we're at between the Potomac and the Shenandoah, the soils are very rich in the Eastern Panhandle. It's not a very big, it's almost like a peninsula, if you will, surrounded on both sides by those rivers. And so over the, eons that those rivers have flowed, the soils around here become very enriched, often loamy, often deep and black. And that lends the flavor to the grains that are growing here. Our rye, our wheat, and our barley are typically also grown in the county. Usually about 90% of the grains we can source from in the county. Sometimes malt is hard to come by, though there is a small malt house. If you can find a local malt house when you're building your distillery, that is really, really nice. Because then you can have some real personalization on how your malts are being produced. And that's something you can actually control maybe if you've got a local malt house.
Sure.
A lot of times we'll buy malt, though, from the big guys out west. But, Michigan, Wisconsin, a lot of those areas up there, these are huge fields of barley.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, miles upon miles, and some of the biggest malt houses are found up there around the Great Lakes, and throughout the entire country. But we like the malts to come out of there a lot too.
Yeah.
But yeah, trying to another thing is to be a distiller in West Virginia with our small distillery license, we're required by law to source at least 75% of our grains from in-state. And so that also helps make it a truly unique product, as we'd say. If you want a bottle of Devil's Due and you want the flavor that we produce, but you can't get it anywhere else. And so that really helps us in competition. I told you earlier today, there for local distilleries, there's no competition.
No.
In fact, the more, because it just brings folks out who are interested in that type of thing, and then they come see us all. And so really it's better for business when there are more. It's kind of like the winery, some of the wineries over here in the DC region. There's a great cluster of them, and they have become an attraction.
Yeah.
You can go 10 in a day. If you could make it that far after all those tastings.
I think my record is 4.
Yeah.
I did the trifecta once with my wife last year. I think it was last summer. We went brewery, winery, distillery. And we hadn't planned on it. We were just on the road, and it's like, oh, there's a distillery on the way. Oh, okay. That was great. No, I do love that, and I think that it's really unique. I mean, you made mention before that, you could give someone your same recipe, even your same grains down the road, and they could make it the exact same way. It would still taste different.
It's like a butterfly's wings.
It really is.
And any of little variations that occur along the way, they will carry forward. And if you look around here, these barrels age for years.
Yeah.
And so what goes into them, even small variations, are going to create ripple effects down the road on that. Don't come to me for consistency. But I mean, that's kind of the part of the fun craft thing. You're always going to taste something different just by the fact that it's very small batch.
Right.
Our typical batch size off distillation is about 15 gallons.
Oh, sure.
When you look over here at these 53-gallon barrels, it takes us a week to fill one of those up. And these smaller 15-gallon barrels, well, that's all single batch, single barrel. It's as micro as you can get. The whiskeys we make in the summer versus the whiskeys we make in the winter are going to have different flavors. And so when we run the same mash bill and they go in these small barrels, there'll be a departure. There will be enough of a similarity there that you'll be able to understand that, oh yeah, maybe this is this mash bill. But yeah, definitely there will be big departures from it in the individual flavors you'll find.
How much of that was a learned process? Did you find a sweet spot of what size barrel and when and what, the age? Is it just ad hoc as you find out every year, or?
It's always building on experience for sure. The first thing we had to do was to try and find out what our flavor profile would be coming off the still. You have to back that up to, how big are our grain loads going to be?
Right.
The grain to water ratio is going to affect how much sugar you can build, and therefore what your alcohol yield is going to be. When your yeaster, depending on the strain that your yeast are under, is going to be different flavors that might go into that as well, because those yeast are going to produce their own flavors. Then you've got to ferment that and then distill it to a certain purity. Whiskey is typically distilled at 160 proof and below. And we distill on our column still in a range of between maybe 150 and 120, somewhere in there, depending on the intensity of the flavor of the grain we want. When you distill things higher, it becomes more flavorless. When you get into the 196 proof range, you're making vodka at that point. Typically, you know how it's made. So whiskey, typically made under 160 proof, that's 80% alcohol, 20% water vapor that comes through your still. And it's really the amount of water vapor that you allow to travel through your still that's going to tell you how flavorful your whiskey is going to be. Water vapor carries the flavor of the grain. The higher concentration of it, the heavier the grain flavor is on your whiskey. Now we're start developing a flavor profile of the white spirit that comes off the still.
Gotcha.
Then you go into barrel aging, right?
Yeah.
And we're still understanding that.
Yeah.
The barrel, always made from white oak, always charred on the inside, but there are char levels and toast levels, because what you want to do is you want to maximize the caramelization of oak sugars, and then understand what your char level is going to be, and that is going to have drastic effects on the flavor of your whiskey. A typical bourbon in the United States in a char 3 barrel, all that means is that barrel has been set on fire for somewhere between 45 seconds and 1 minute before the fire is extinguished and the charring is done. But the heat transfer that occurs there into the deeper parts of the wood causes the caramelization effect. Those are the signature flavors you're going to find on your whiskeys at that point. I mean, bourbon is the quintessential flavor of caramel corn.
Yes.
And then all of those other notes and the level of those other notes, the oak and the char, is going to depend on how long you set that barrel on fire for. The longer towards a char, and I know guys who use char 5s for long-term ages, you start to pick up deeper notes. They'll start to, you'll go from caramels and vanillas into coffees and leathers, the harder you get over there. Plus all the other notes in between that might come out of there. So yeah, it really is true. Like you make the same product down the street, it will not taste the same.
Yeah.
Those little tiny choices the distiller makes along the way.
Well, I've even talked to people who get really in the weeds of the soil that the tree that the wood came from the barrel grew in, and
I know cooperages that take that very seriously.
And it's really interesting because I think the general consumer doesn't know that, and I love hearing about it. I don't know how much it would play on
these small barrels. They come from Missouri.
Okay.
The oak there is harvested in the Ozarks.
Oh.
That region. It's more of a northern oak, very tight grain. But I have other barrels over here sourced out of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that oak is harvested in Appalachia. And we've used oak from Kentucky's, and a lot of that, I believe, comes from the Kentucky or the Tennessee Valley area. White oak was chosen for barrels because it's probably one of the most common hardwoods in the Northern Hemisphere. That and it'll hold water.
Right.
They used to make all the ships out of white oak. It'd keep water out of your ship.
Right.
You make it out of red oak, your boat will sink.
Yeah.
And so white oak kind of naturally, and we're talking thousands of years. This industry is thousands, maybe 7,000 years old when we talk about why choosing white oak, maybe before that.
Sure.
And so because it had they didn't have plastic back then, and you had to put your liquid in something.
Right.
A long time ago, it was held for wine. It wasn't until, and there's so many legends, it wasn't until probably the 1700s where we started charring barrels. I challenge anyone to tell me what the real story is. I could give you a bunch of legends that I've read about and heard.
I always think it's funny, like to speculate, like how was Reese's peanut butter cup discovered?
Yeah,
like that you've seen in commercial.
Yeah.
Oh, you got my peanut butter in your chocolate. It's an accident. you lit my barrel on fire. My whiskey tastes good.
Likely it was an accident. It all came together accidentally.
Yeah.
But a very but old. These are old, very old concepts. People, humans have been after alcohol since the dawn of time.
Yes, sir.
And this is a very, very, and I don't know. I mean, maybe that's why we like the industry so much. It's an old industry. I think that's what brings a lot of enjoyment. It's very visceral. It's very close to the earth. And that's like a big seller for if you want to work here. Like we find people who understand that.
Yeah.
And if they hang out here long enough, we give them jobs. We should taste some.
I was going to say that we should cheers to history because
absolutely
you're selling the human beings on me.
I'm gonna slide this forward so you can hear me. I have prepared 2 samples today for us to taste. The first one, this is a first edition 4-grain.
Okay.
Pour you a little here. I do this out of a 53-gallon barrel. This was laid down 28 July of 2021.
Okay.
Its barrel entry proof was 113 proof, so my suspicion now, because, these barrels are great at holding liquid. They're terrible at holding gases, and so alcohol and water is always evaporating out of them. We tend to lose a little more water than alcohol, so I'd say 115, 116 proof. The mash bill here, 61% corn. This comes from the Blues Farm over in Shenandoah Junction, about 2 miles from here. 5% malted rye. This was back when we did our single malt rye project. And so we had the rye malted as well, bringing on those kind of leather coffee notes, some deeper kind of earthy notes to it. 11% malted barley, and 23% wheat. So this is a highly wheated bourbon. And those 3 grains were grown over in Ripon, at Ripon Farm Lodge. There's a small brewery over there, and they have about 500 acres of fields over there they're planting. And so this particular whiskey, 100% grown inside the county. The wood sourced out of Speyside Cooperage in Virginia, a medium toast char number 3 barrel, and then proofing water sourced out of Berkeley Springs, which is a pretty famous aquifer up the road here. They got George Washington's bathtub up there. Washington slept everywhere around here, but he really did like Berkeley Springs a lot. The water back then known for its healing powers, highly mineralized, literally pouring out of the side of the mountain over there.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so a highly curated product here that was mashed, fermented, distilled here on site, and now just approaching 3 years. We suspect this one will have an August-September release date this year.
Okay.
Upon the smell, kind of a buttery oak smell, followed by a caramel note. A good amount of charring here from the char 3.
I get a lot of that malted, like chocolate cocoa on the note.
And then this one having 2 different malts in it, rye and barley, makes it a pretty unique product.
Yeah. Well, cheers, sir.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Can't get it anywhere else. Sweet notes. I almost taste a hint of cherry on the front end in the initial. Very sweet from the wood, very sweet from the high quantity of corn. This one, again, about 61% corn. So big notes there. But now when I'm looking at it, 16% of this mash bill is malt between the 2 grains. And then, of course, the high wheat load on this is going to bring those florals, those grassies, and that extra sweetness to it. So yeah, a good sweet bourbon.
That's really sweet on the front end, like a cherry almost, like a darker fruit, dark cherry. But then all of a sudden, as it washes down the tongue, what's left is a lot of just malty goodness.
Oh yeah.
I'm a sucker for single malt. I love the chocolate notes from single malt.
Yeah.
So this is kind of breaking my brain because this is a bourbon.
This is bourbon, yeah.
Wow.
But an interestingly curated malt load on this one.
Yeah.
The great thing about craft, the big guys have developed that perfect bourbon flavor, the quintessential, this is what bourbon's supposed to taste like.
Sure.
And then we, the small guys, like to break that constantly. And the great thing about bourbon, bourbon has rules.
Of course.
And those rules have been in place about 60 years now. I think it was the late 60s when bourbon became America's spirit. But the rules are simple. 51% corn, off the parrot on the still at under 160 proof, because you got to have that grain flavor in there.
Right.
Into the barrel at no more than 125 proof, because the government doesn't want you adding too much water at the back end. The big boys will jam it in at 125, put it in a hot rick house. It'll probably come out at 135, and then they'll add water to it till it gets to 80. And so you can turn almost 1 barrel into 2 barrels at that rate. So they don't want it too much. If they were able to, I think if we were able to, we'd put it in at pure alcohol.
Yeah.
Because the amount of volume you would get at the back end, man, he is just stealing the show today. I do apologize.
Oh man, no, you're fine. I love dogs. Viral, samples.
So we can play.
Go on.
In these little areas here. Come here, Sailor.
Yeah, attention.
He's distiller dog in training because he's still learning his. There you go.
His manners.
He's still learning his manners. He's not finding them.
Oh, that's good. He's a good worker.
Yeah, I know. You're bored. But yeah, so in this particular one, we got to play with the different varieties of grain that were available. Now, if we look at another one here, and we can get into this one in a minute.
Yeah.
The next one we'll try is a high rye bourbon. Heavy corn load on this, about 75%. Now in the ryes, normally on the market. Now look, there are really 2 main kinds of bourbon in the United States. 85%, in my opinion, and I could be off, but are rye bourbons. Typically a high corn load. A touch of rye, 6 to 12, maybe 10, 12%, and then malt for that good smooth finish. aged for on average 2 to 4 years in toasted and charred white American oak. That is the vast majority of whiskeys on the market. Think all the big guys over at Jim Beam and Jack Daniels and anybody who's got a name in their name, you're pretty likely to find them there. But the guys at Maker's Mark, no, they've always had wheat and they're wheated bourbon. Blanton's is the same way. Pappy and Weller are wheated bourbons as well.
Yep.
And so you either have a touch of spice in your bourbon or you have a touch more sweetness. Now the wheats, correct, and I'll tell you, open a bottle of Antique 107 by Weller. It smells like flowers. I think it's absolutely the most amazing thing ever, right? They'll bring those extra floral, grassy notes. Sometimes when it comes off the still, it's almost doughy.
Yeah.
That calms down after a while, I think, in the barrel. But yeah, so that, and they make up, those wheated bourbons, I think, make up about 15-20% of the market. And they are just, I think they're lovely in their own right. My brother prefers rye bourbons. I preferred wheated. So, there's always a back and forth. The whiskey we're tasting right now is a combination of both.
Yeah.
This is where he and I meet in the middle. We call it Prime. And another little fun one. Prime is named after the number.
Okay.
A prime number. The mash bill components are always prime numbers. We're drinking a first edition Prime 1 here. But Prime 2, Prime 3, we're up to Prime 11 now. By the way, we skip numbers because they're prime numbers, unless they're prime numbers. But each time we make new barrels and we make a new prime, we tear up that mash bill and we create entirely new mash bills, just always with prime numbers. Right now, we're in the bourbon series of them, but eventually that could switch over into the rye or into the wheat down the road, where those will become the dominant grain.
Sure.
You want to make bourbon, it's got to be 51% corn. You want to make wheat whiskey, it's got to be 51% wheat. Same with rye. And so, well, then we almost have vintages, right? That's for I make this for all you bourbon hunters out there. Come on by. It'll you'll be able to try primes and they'll never taste the same. It'll be wild, these 4-grain whiskeys. They're all the rage right now.
Oh, so did you find a sweet spot with, is it a blend? How did you find that was the mash bill that you wanted to go with? What was it, just a lot of testing?
No, I mean, that's the great thing about this mash bill. Prime 1, this mash bill, we'll never make it again.
That's awesome.
We'll only always move forward with a new one.
Sure.
So it's more our exploration as it is yours, when you come in and try them.
Yeah, I love that.
And that is what is a lot more difficult for the big guys to do than the small, nimble, flexible little guys who are way more interested. I have 15 mash bills back here. Way more interested in understanding all those different varieties. I think that's what gives Americans an edge over, I think we talked earlier. The Scots have been running the same rules on Scotch for over 1,000 years.
Right.
It's been very narrow. They don't get to deviate. You come over to America, it's like cowboy land. We play fast and loose with the rules. There's only a couple we got to follow. That we got to get that mash bill right. It's got to go into a charred white American oak. There's no aging statement on whiskey. You could pour it into the barrel and pour it right out and technically call it bourbon, but you can't fix time.
Right.
And the customer at the end of the day has to be able to smell it and taste it and go, well, that's got that quintessential bourbon flavor on it.
Right. Recognizable.
And we have to deliver that. The notes, on the other hand, then we can play with the notes inside of there. And that's really where a lot of the people who, are fans, the people who are super fans, the people who like us, that's why they come here.
Yeah.
It's because you're going to taste bourbon, but a lot of these small distilleries, it's bourbon like you've never tasted it before. Certainly not the, kind of the larger commercial flavors, which, don't get me wrong, are lovely.
Oh, sure.
But at Devil's Due Distillery, we never say we don't aim to be better. We just want to be different. And so if you want to come for a different experience, I guarantee you're a good time. You're going to get it here.
I appreciate that. Actually, that's a good question. What do you think is your elevator pitch for what is the most unique part about Devil's Due in a market that is becoming so big in craft distilling, which I love. We both love. It's not a competition, like you said. I think that's a good part of it.
Yeah.
But what sets you apart? What's your elevator pitch for our whiskey is this?
Good local provenance, good ingredients. Fact that we strive very hard to make it, for our house whiskeys, to make every aspect of it, we oversee it. Now, look, in the whiskey business, the whiskey in the bottle, and this is a hard truth, it's half of your story. We call it the juice has got to taste good, but the packaging is the other half.
Yep.
And so we take art and creativity as seriously as we take the whiskey around here. So much so that, the rest of our team, we have a graphic design team here. There's a lot of art in our distillery. There's a lot of art that goes into our labels because you got to stand out on the shelf. You know what I mean? You got to stand out to your customer. And so it's a combination. Look, if you're going to become a distiller, you have to have passion. If you do not, you won't last long. Like, you have to live it.
Right.
You have to bathe in it.
Yep.
And really, in order to sell it.
Yes.
And so we take that very seriously around here. That, I think that entire package is what allows us to stand out, is what allows us to compete.
I love that.
Now we're trying to bring that to the market. We would, regionally anyway, we want to bring it to a spirit shop near you. And that's kind of a very standard model for a small distillery.
Yeah.
At least have regional growth because, if you want to compete in this industry, you have to have very deep marketing pockets. And that's just something that most small distilleries don't have.
Right.
Certainly not in the beginning.
No.
So first you got to make a name for yourself. And so we base a lot of that on our creativity and our quality. Look at that.
Tasting the barrel.
We sell these. This is it's just a piece of wood.
Yeah.
Right. We brand all of our barrels, and we brand them. We call them dog licking boards. It's pretty funny that we got a dog licking our dog licking board right now. Yeah, just a little something.
Yeah.
Sailor, you're a hoot, man. But yeah, and so it's not. I mean, if you have the passion, it's not hard to differentiate yourself in this industry. The story, we talked about it a lot. Well, how are we going to write our story? We don't. It writes itself.
Sure.
As long as we stick to those tenets, try to keep it hyper local, and try and keep it really creative, and then you don't even have to write your story. Have good social marketing skills. That helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Social media is, man,
it's a bear.
As much as I don't like it very much, I do engage in it commercially because it is a very, very powerful tool.
Yes, 100%. Well, that's kind of what I'm doing this for, is that, this is kind of just a side passion project of mine that I get to come talk to you guys and get your story out there and showcase your space. And because it's more than just the whiskey, it's not, and it's also more than just the aesthetic of the bottle. It's also, you have a tasting room and you have a tour and you have a still, and there's a lot of aesthetic to what you do. And I think there's a lot of that gets lost in when you go buy a bottle off a shelf.
There's two sides to a distillery. If it goes out our front door here on site, we're selling it by the bottle.
Right.
And if it goes out our back door here on site, we're selling by the pallet.
Right.
And so that pallet sale is typically sold to a state.
Yep.
I wouldn't say the majority, but many of the states around here have centralized ABC control, alcohol beverage control. And so when we put it into what's called the bailment system, then it goes out in the pallet. And so for new distilleries, your tasting room is so important.
Yes.
You're at 100% of your sales are going to come from there in the beginning. Building a distribution business, on the other hand, oh boy, that's a tall order. That's where the marketing comes in. And so normally it kind of looks like this, all your eggs are, and you need to put all your eggs in your tasting room basket. You need to build out the nicest tasting room you can.
Yes.
Because that's going to keep your lights on. That's going to expand you into something that might be viable for actual distribution one day. That's the phase we're in right now.
Sure.
But eventually, we build that distribution over time. We get our name out there over time, and one day, the distiller's goal, a lot of distillers' goals, I won't say all of them, but many of them is to see that happen, to have those distribution sales overtake their tasting room. And then when that happens, you got a decent shot at moving from micro distillery to small distillery, maybe.
Right.
And small distillery means you now have increased your equipment size. You now have created enough volume to be able to supply a small regional market. And that's where we're looking to go on our next step. Distilleries are generational. You won't see a 10-year-old whiskey out of this place for a long, long time.
Right.
We're just coming into 3-year-old whiskey, and yeah, we got to sell that. How in the world are we going to get a bigger still if we don't sell our 3-year-olds? So support your local distilleries as they're growing, because wonders are going to come out of there if you do in the future. Because once they get to a 3-year-old, then they can even maybe think about starting to lay down 4-year-old. And then some years will go by, and once that comes out, maybe you'll get a bonded bourbon out of a 4-year-old, And then maybe one day they'll be able to lay down something for a 6-year-old.
Right.
But to leave that investment money sitting there for 6 years,
That's
oh boy.
tough.
Well, it's a bridge too far for us still.
Right.
But we'll get there for sure.
What I've always asked the question for smaller places like yourself too is it how much of that is that song and dance and playing with the cash register? Like, have you been able to find one barrel that says, you know what, this is just too good, I'm going to let this sit? Or are you able to afford to play with that? Or
there are a couple of gems in there that we're considering as holdovers. Yeah.
Okay.
There'll be a few, and let me tell you, they'll when we release them, there will be very small quantities
Right.
of them.
Yep.
This whiskey is evaporating right out of the barrel as we speak. Typically, the angel share, the oh my boy, I know. The angel share on these barrels by the time they come to market is about 15% at least.
Wow.
Maybe 20%. The smaller the barrel, the higher the evaporation rate.
Right.
And so, but even by the time we get to 3 years old, yeah, we're gonna have lost a considerable amount of that whiskey. Now, that's essential though to the flavor.
Of
you
course.
know what I mean? Like
Yes.
that evaporation is causing the volume to decrease, and so it's causing a condensing of the flavors that are inside of that barrel.
Right.
Without that, you're just not going to have as flavorful of a bourbon.
Right.
You leave it in there too long in a hot, dusty warehouse, and you're.
He just wants attention.
I know.
It's time to play, Dad. Come on now.
You're going to have you leave it in there too long, you're going to have an oily, very charred, kind of acrid mess at the bottom.
Yeah.
There's always the possibility you're going to over oak your whiskeys.
Right.
And that can end. The smaller the barrel, the more in jeopardy they are, I'd say.
Right.
It's typically the 15-gallon barrel. We age in the quarter cask and in the full barrel. And
Hi, bud. I know I'm taking away his time from you.
yeah, I know. Hang on just a second. Hey,
Oh, you're fine.
hey, so let's give this one a taste.
So this is the high rye.
The high rye bourbon. Yeah. So kind of back to that conversation. So the typical rye, 6 to 10% maybe. This one almost 18%.
Okay.
About 8% malt. High corn load, almost 75% here. This one laid down September 29th of 21. And so just about a little older than 2 years now. But this one more of will have, I think, a bigger spice note on it than the last one that had kind of those deeper notes on it. Laid into the barrel at 109 proof. I suspect we're around 112, 113 on this guy now.
Okay.
I think really sweet on the nose.
Yeah. I can tell it's a high rye on the nose, but
and it's definitely gonna have that rye punch on the front of it, that spice note on it.
right. Oh yeah, that's worlds different.
Oh yeah, big rye note on it in there.
See, in full transparency, I prefer a high rye bourbon. My go-to cheap is Old Grandad.
There you go.
That's all high rye. But that it's cool having those back to back to see how different that wheat and the rye mix.
Oh, really? Much sweeter on the wheat.
Yeah.
But that one, we threw a few curveballs in that last one.
Yeah, you did.
In the 4G there.
But this is really good. I love that.
I sold a barrel today. You were here. I sold a barrel today.
I watched it happen.
That's actually a 5 grain that we did. That is another prime, a prime 3. We'll be releasing that one in about midsummer. That one we used a brewer's malt in it as well, a Munich malt for those German style beers. Small amount, about 5% in there, but I think the total grain load on that was like about 12 or 15% malt. So distiller's malt and Munich malt, and man, that throws in some wild flavors too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, even the small percentages of these different grains, the difference between brewer's malt and distiller's malt is malt being barley allowed to germinate in a malt house for a few days, usually about a week, and then kiln dried for the distiller, lightly dried, to remove the content, to stop the germination, to produce that enzyme that distillers crave that we call amylase.
Yes.
That enzyme being responsible for turning starch into sugar.
Sure.
Basically, it breaks down starch molecules and makes those simple sugars. Brewer's malts, on the other hand, typically lightly toasted. Now, this is important to note because the enzyme amylase is very heat or not very heat tolerant. And so as you start to roast malts, you get a distiller's malt, which is the lightest, all the way to a crystal malt, which is the darkest. By the time you get to crystal malt, that enzyme has been effectively destroyed.
Sure.
And so they have to have other ways of creating the sugars. But what you get across that spectrum of lightly toasted to really heavily toasted malts is an entire rainbow of flavors that comes out. And you can see it affected in all the different varieties of beers, from crisp light lagers all the way to heavy porters and stouts.
Sure.
And that is how they're toasting that malt. It affects color, flavor, the whole 9 yards. For the distiller, though, during mashing and fermentation, it's going to impart, those little notes, different flavors. And that Munich malt imparted kind of a lovely, different malty note. It's hard to describe. You got to taste it. You got to come by and taste it.
I will.
That one will be for sale in a couple of months. But really interesting. So 5 grain on that one. Corn, rye, wheat. I think that has a high wheat load, about 20% wheat load on it.
Wow.
And then a real big malt load on it. Always being bourbon.
Sure.
Because we are achieving the 51% corn on there, but with kind of wildly different notes in it, which is, makes it fun.
Yeah, I was gonna say
that's where the fun comes from.
The best job in the world. I love that. Well, is there anything? Well, actually, we talked on before I sat down with you, we were talking about what you have coming up. You're doing cigar stuff.
Yeah,
tell me about that.
So starting this summer, and I don't have a date for you yet, but I think it's me sooner than later. For the last couple months, we've had the guys over at Sips and Sticks in Virginia. Give them a shout out there.
Yeah.
Check these guys out. You can find them on the Google. They're doing amazing things with cigars. They have been infusing their cigars with our bourbon and humidor for, I think, about 4 months now.
Wow.
And literally, they will take the humidors with those cigars. There'll be a shot of water, a shot of whiskey in there, and they will allow that to completely evaporate and be absorbed into the cigars in that humidor, and it will put that bourbon, that really nice bourbon flavor into the cigars. I had a Proto And man, it's pretty wild. So we're waiting for those to be finished, and then we will launch.
Ooh, Escapee.
Escapee, my man. We will launch that series soon.
Okay.
And you'll be able to come down here and try one of our bourbon infused cigars with a glass of whiskey.
I love it. I love it. Man, Sailor, you need us. I know. I love it. Just be careful when you run by the camera.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're almost done. There it goes. All right.
I think we're good.
Yeah. Well, hey, Wylie, I really appreciate you having me here. This has been an awesome experience.
Thank you so much. Stole the show today, boy.
He really did. I really appreciate all you do here. I mean, our kinship and whiskey and our love for the spirit, and I mean the TLC that you give your craft and what you do here in the space. I mean, keep going, man. I know it's a tough journey, but you're doing some awesome stuff. The whiskeys, I think they're lovely right now. We will only get better over time as we really, really hone our craft in. And there are just amazing things coming out of here. I tell people I sell whiskey, but we try and sell joy here. Yeah.
We try and, when people come in, we try and really bring them in, show them how we do it, and everybody leaves with a smile on their face.
That's medicinal.
And, it's just fun.
I love it. Well, hey, cheers to you and all you're doing.
To you. Thanks so much for having me today.
Of course. Thank you. Appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate a follow and share on social media, subscribe to our YouTube, and be sure to give us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Everything you see and hear is out of pocket for us, including travel. If you support our mission of showcasing the amazing stories behind these small businesses, do me a favor and head over to buymeacoffee.com/craftedconvos. Buy Me a Coffee is an awesome way to help creators like me with simple one-time donations or a monthly contribution. Every dime goes into giving these breweries, distilleries, and more some much-deserved limelight. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out. Cheers!